other kids' parents brought home ice cream so that they could eat it while watching TV as a family. My dad brought home a beaver carcass so that we could dissect it together and then bury it under rocks for the maggots to pick clean so that he could chop off the head and keep the skull as another decoration for the living room. Which was great because ice cream makes me ill and we didn't really have TV. I feel really fortunate to have grown up in the woods with a wetland as my backyard because I was too introverted to have friends. And it was okay because I had 2 beaver dams and a fox den and as many deer and birds as I needed to keep me company. And my favorite days were when my dad would bring home these dead animals and my sisters and I would use his veterinary surgical tools to cut them open and see what was inside. And he would tell us all about the different organs and how they worked and how they all functioned together in this super intricate, awesome mechanism that made life happen. And it was amazing, and it always felt like any question I had could be answered with my family. And that, I wanted to know more about beaver tails, so my dad found a dead beaver, and we cut open the tail, and we found all the answers inside. So when I wasn't dissecting roadkill, or playing with frogs, or spending hours watching spiders construct their webs, I was at school. And at school, kids chatted about their home life, and I quickly learned not to mention the whole skull collection thing, especially around lunchtime. And in general, came to realize that things that felt incredibly normal to me in my environment, to others, turned out to be incredibly abnormal. But then by the time I left Vermont and I went to college, I had kind of come to terms with that part of myself and grew to embrace and love and take pride in my upbringing and my family. And I had decided that I wanted to make friends with people who could really appreciate those parts about me. And so I was really excited for a fresh start to get this closeness with other people. And through that closeness and through the awkwardness of living in a dorm with peers, I became really intimately acquainted with other people's lives, and in particular with other people's anatomy. So my body was always kind of weird. And but like my childhood pastimes, I didn't really realize it at first because a lot of my quirks were the same quirks that my family had. So my GI tract was a total mess, but it wasn't that much worse than some of my relatives. And my joints popped and ached and hyperextended, but so did my sisters. And, I got things like frequent migraines and dry eye and ulcers and fungal infections, but so did one of my parents. So all of this seemed normal. And what seemed different about me was that somehow I was weaker, or I was a wimp. And that I wasn't able to live life as exuberantly as everybody else seemed to do, considering that this was just what normal bodies were. So in college, I'm looking around and I'm noticing that actually nobody else gets horribly ill after a quarter of a beer. And nobody else in the dining hall is piling 4 or 5 plates of food and shoveling the whole thing in and then still feeling hungry and having to tote around a Costco box of 48 granola bars everywhere they went. And nobody else was having migraines for 10 days straight that made it impossible to focus in class. So I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't totally normal. Maybe there's some issues that I should probably figure out. And but that's okay, because that's what science is all about, is taking the unknown and figuring it out and using evidence and procedures and data to work out some sort of answer and draw conclusions. So it was great. It became this new project. And I was really determined to find these answers, and I figured all I had to do was look inside, and I'd get those answers that I had always gotten. So, to look inside, I got MRIs, I got ultrasounds, I got x-rays, I had cameras shoved in pretty much every orifice possible, and it was fascinating every time to see what was inside. But I kept diligent notes in a scientific journal where I was writing down everything I did or ate or excreted, and I was taking records of my blood pressure and heart rate, and I was reading everything I could possibly read and researching and interviewing people I knew who had similar symptoms, and it was fascinating, and I was getting so close, and I needed to find these answers. And about 1 million panic attacks and road trips and doctor-induced traumas later, I had a diagnosis, and I was pumped. I was so excited. I had found the answer. And the more I delved into this diagnosis, the more I learned that the cluster of diseases that are in my DNA were actually bringing up far more questions than answers. And although they were not actually rare diseases, they are incredibly under-researched and newly discovered diseases. And so this divinity that I was looking for just didn't exist, but I needed to know. I needed to have all these answers, and it was just an impossible challenge. But the thing is that is actually the beauty of science, is that there's this unending, never-ending, explorable world, and that we will never, ever know all that there is to know about nature or other galaxies or the brain or the cells in our bodies. But that's what drives people to become ecologists and neuroscientists, and that's what drives people to launch themselves into space, and that's what drives people to build better and more exact microscopes. And so there's this world of the unexplored, and what I need to do is to rediscover the beauty and the thrill of the quest.